Well, we're here at Davos, where for many, many years, the question of branding India has always been right up there on the agenda. Remember, it was here at Davos a few years back that this entire concept of India as a big resurgent country really was brought to the forefront. Well, that brand seems to be going back and forth a little bit over the last 3 years. So how can India get back that punch? We are here to find out. Lionel Barber of the Financial Times, it's great to have you with us. Sohail Seth, who knows all about branding, and Ajay Banga of MasterCard. It's great to have all three of you with us. First of all, the India brand itself. In a sense, there was a time when India was the only flavor out here, well, almost the only flavor along with China, perhaps overstated. Last 2 years, India is over. This year, some bemusement of the amount of chaos that we are seeing?
Well, you always need to be careful about Davos judgments because they're inevitably, the collective wisdom is a year wrong, so either way. I think you can also tell a lot by the billboards. So about 5-6 years ago, when India was on the prowl and on the up, I think it was incredible India. And then we had a bit of a change in mood, inclusive India.
Yeah.
And now we've got the India that it's the world's biggest middle class consumer. So I think India is back with a small b.
Back with a small b. Okay, that's one way of looking at it, Mr. Banga.
Well, I agree with him. I think you should be very careful about passing judgments based on what people say in the rarefied atmosphere of Davos. The fact is, India has the consumer market. It has the opportunities. It has many things to sort out to make it conducive for business people, domestic and overseas. But it has the opportunity. And the question is, can you capitalize on that? And can you create the right opportunity for the consumer to spend in India? Can you create the right number of jobs that you're going to need to create to make it such a vibrant market? So that's where I'm coming from.
Okay, assuming you're here to say, let's rebrand India now, after all that's happened in the last 4 or 5 years, what would you do?
I think what Lionel was referring to was the campaign we ran in Davos many years ago called India Everywhere, where we talked about the world's largest democracy and the world's biggest free market. I think some of the things have fallen through the cracks. Number one, Narega talks about inclusion on the face of it, but it allows a lot of money into the hands of normal individuals and would therefore lead to a resurgence in consumerism. We haven't been able to position brand India's inherent strengths coming out of inclusiveness. Inclusiveness has a role to play in redefining the consumer aspiration of a country as large as India. Number two, I think hyperbole is not what people are looking at. People are looking at feet on the ground. They're looking at policy decisions which aren't flip-flop. Lionel, in his interview with the finance minister both this morning as well as in Delhi in November, asked, saying that investors are worried about the constant backing and forthing. I think the one thing we've got to decide is government, irrespective of party affiliation, must be able to create a consistent policy which investors can then live with.
Okay. So to that extent, I mean, you're right, Davos is often 1 year out or sometimes 2 years out in its predictions. But right now, the negativity that we saw about India the last couple of years, has that been changed to a certain amount of let's wait and watch and see what actually happens in the election, because that could be a game changer, well, one way or the other?
You think there's negativity about India? You want to talk about France?
Well, I mean, India's not the only country which Davos is negative about. They're negative about lots and lots of countries.
Yeah, I think India had a great mid-decade, and it was living off the reforms. Things got a little bit out of hand, especially then with the impact of the global financial crisis. But my sense, and I spent a week in India late November, is that the worst is over. The question, as Sohail rightly says, is can it really live up to its potential? And the potential ought to be 8% growth. The biggest change compared to 2006, when I arrived in India, got to Delhi airport, everybody says, who's going to win the race, the global race, India or China? Nobody asks that. They think the race is over. It's China.
That's rather sad, but probably true. That's the way the perception is right now.
So I think that actually the market's still very open for an investor because China is another complicated country to invest in. Both India and China have challenges for investors. Look, I think India did a lot of good things some time back, as Lionel said really well. The issue is we've encountered roadblocks with flip-flopping, but also around specific issues with intellectual property and with taxation. You cannot ask a businessman to change the game on the spreadsheet with which they invest after they have invested. You have to make the rules clear before you invest. And I think
So that Vodafone thing still very much playing on everyone's
and
mind.
other aspects of it, which I think the government has attempted to step in and clarify rules around different kinds of taxation and create, I think Mr. Chidambaram is trying to create opportunities to settle cases quicker. But the fact is, there is this lingering fear around IP and taxation as two examples. Okay. The bigger picture here, Vikram, at the end of the day, is that India needs to create 12 to 15 million jobs a year.
Yep.
That is what we need for our demographic dividend to become a real dividend and not an issue. For that to happen properly, there are three places India must invest. And I said them to you earlier, and I'll repeat them again. Tourism, manufacturing, and infrastructure.
Yeah.
Without those three, we will never be able to get past the consumerism, the real opportunity, the real potential for 8% growth that Lionel talked about. We need those three.
Okay, I'm going to give one last final word to you.
No, I believe that, both Ajay and Lionel touch upon the fact that investors, India's got to realize that every global investor has a choice. India's not the only apple in the orchard. So if global investors have a choice, they're going to decide on three things. Number one, ease of doing business. Number two, no retrospective hardship. And number three, clarity and conformity. We seem to have created a vagueness, an obtuseness of our entire investment strategy, which deters investors. People need to invest if India is to achieve those growth figures.
Okay. So at the end of the day, though, having said everything that we have right now, would a lot of people be still waiting to see what happens in the election, or does that not really matter too much?
It matters a lot, but let's not completely... It matters a lot because India is the world's biggest democracy. It matters whether you can realize the potential that we've been talking about in this interview. But there's a lot of things that are going on at state level which are quite impressive. In states like Bihar, not just Gujarat, we hear a lot about Gujarat, but there are other states. So the only question that I would ask is if we get an a fragmented result and you have a lot of weakness in Delhi, a complicated coalition, there's always going to be a coalition, that would be, I think, not so good. The one advantage you've got, on the other hand, is you've got a very talented and I think effective central bank governor who really knows what he wants to do in terms of managing the economy.
All right, so some early thoughts on what the mood at Davos is going to be, but as I think everyone here was saying, don't necessarily go by that. Sometimes Davos picks up trends a couple of years after they've actually happened.